Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today, I get the pleasure to sit down with Micky Verma, who is currently the co-founder of Shailnex Group. Now, Micky started off his career, from what I've seen on the LinkedIn, starting off in management consulting, subsequently got into a lot more technical roles, leading at the executive level as a digital transformation executive, as a CIO and a CTO at multiple companies. But Micky, tell me a little bit more from your perspective about your background and how it led you to what you're doing today.
Oh, thanks, Aryan. And first, thanks for having me here today. Look forward to the conversation. It's very exciting. But yeah, to your point, I've started my career way back when, but really started in the technical role, right? From developer programming all the way up the chain. Right into different areas of technology, not only from application development, but to database DBA kind of programming and administration, infrastructure. So a full gambit, so to speak, across the board, as well as running global support, teams for operational support as well. So, that background really helped me sort of continued my path, as so to speak, right? And then started really tying in a lot of the business side of the equation as well to that, right? And really focusing on how do you bring both together. It's really, I always thought, and kind of the principles I go by is that technology is there to enable the business, right? And that's really kind of the core of what I've been trying to do. I've been lucky enough to take on some large strategic roles at Fortune 100, right, at C-level and digital transformation execs, and it's given me a really good, unique perspective, on how
Excellent.
to scale, transform, and really cut across all the pieces that are really there, especially in today's complex world.
So from what I'm understanding, you actually got into technical roles first, and then you got into a little bit of the business, such as management consulting role. Can you tell me a little bit more about that transition? Why you decided to do that? Because it's a bit more non-traditional, you could say.
Yeah, no, it has. It was. When I first started out of college, I actually started with in a consultative role with a consulting firm, which actually was for me personally was a great experience. Got right away, I got a full breadth of experience in a lot of different things, and from that, I enjoyed that, and development, the applications, and everything else, but as you gain more experience and you try to look at different, how do you make a difference? And that's kind of where I've always started trying to get into, regardless of where I was, and what role was, how do you make measurable outcomes, right? And anything I did, I always kind of go back to, a simple statement, what's the problem I'm solving? And that's fundamentally even today, as if I'm leading an initiative or an organization, and my question always is to the team, okay, yeah, great idea, but what problem am I solving, right? And it's kind of, that's the premise of how I kind of transitioned more into the management side and kind of looking over from an organizational perspective.
Excellent. Micky, we're going to talk about why that's so important a little bit later, especially when it comes to applying AI and any kind of AI transformation. As you do know, there's a large contingent of individuals and companies that like to go forward with AI application for the sake of it, versus looking at what is the impact I'm trying to create and then reverse engineer how AI can be applied to that particular outcome. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I think it's a very important perspective you provided. Now, tell me a little bit more about that, the executive leadership from digital transformation perspective. The reason I would love to cover this particularly because, as you know, we were talking before the podcast, around 66%, if I'm not wrong, typically are unsuccessful. So you've had multiple roles as a digital executive. So tell me a little bit more about your thesis on why those goes wrong and what you've learned along the way when it comes to your experience.
Yeah, no, and I think those numbers are quite accurate. In that, and if you start digging into it, and one of the biggest reasons, and I'll just use the quote unquote digital transformations, right, that fail, right. And it's really because companies start to we're treating it as a technology initiative or a priority, right? Instead of a business initiative. And that's kind of key, right? To what I was saying, technology is to help to enable the business, right? But you're not doing technology for the sake of doing technology. If you want to do that, you do it after hours, and you can play around with any form of technology out there, right?
Yeah.
But getting clarity right on the business outcome is really what's key, right? It's not, let's talk AI, and especially in today's world, right? Obviously, it brings a lot of things to the table, right? And at a speed rate that exponential and extraordinary than we've ever seen. But it's not going in there saying we need AI or I need a new system, right? Okay, that's great, but why? Right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? So really, it's getting down and kind of turning it around a little bit and saying, okay, what are you trying to do? Do I need to improve my margins, by 10%? Or do I need to reduce customer churn or something like that by 20, 25%? You've got to have kind of that prioritized and vision. Okay, what am I trying to get? Like, what would I consider success? And if you don't have that up front or haven't thought through that, right, you're going to run into these kind of issues, right? Because I've seen, to be honest, been in with companies, where I've stepped in and, companies were investing millions in systems, but they really then didn't redesign kind of their workflows or other aspects around the business processes. So kind of their adoption stalled, and then leadership or the C-level CEO or saying, why isn't the ROI there that you promised me? Right. So it's, if you look at it just from one lens, that's where you see a lot of the failures. And one of the key things that, I always take a look at, and I think it's very important, especially in these type of transformations, is you got to look at it from three lenses. It's the people, the process, and the technology, and kind of in that order too. People look at me and say, you know what, you're bringing technology. You'll get to the technology and it's there, right? And you have to adapt and scale to it. But if you don't understand how do your people work, what's the best way, what's your current processes, where do you have some gaps, where do you have inefficiencies or other aspects, right? And then you can use the technology to enable all that to, improve that outcome you're looking for.
Right. So that thesis about knowing what you want to achieve and then understanding how you're going to do it with the digital transformation is very important. My question to you is, did you get that clarity from your experience in management consulting? Or what do you think gave you that clarity about creating those measurable outcomes to be able to execute these endeavors?
It's a combination of both, I'll be honest, right? The management consultant gives you the what to look for, right? What are the kind of the key measures from a business perspective and a management? So you've got some layers associated with that, right?
Sure.
But I will say that it's also from experience, right? One's theoretical, so to speak, right? And you can look up, we got MBAs, we have this and that, right? Yep, they're all very valid, and you let me not say anything that way, right? It's very valid, very important. The other aspect is the experience side, because when you get into what I call the real world, it doesn't always follow, like, especially in a digital transformation type world, when you walk into an enterprise, right, or a company, everybody does things differently. Everybody handles things differently, right? And knowing how to adapt, right, what you've learned, what you've seen, right, for that situation, there are things that are common across everything, right? But every company has set things up in their own way that made sense for them, right? You can debate, was it the right way or not, wrong way? That's a different, but they did it for a valid reason, right? For their growth of their company and how they want. So you've got to be able to adapt to that, and I think that's kind of that experience comes into nature.
Now, one of the key points you pointed out was people in terms of digital transformations. Now, one of the other theses, I got a thesis from a different executive about need to have the key stakeholders involved in these digital transformations, and that not being done properly is actually one of the major reasons why digital transformations are unsuccessful. So what is your opinion on really involving those key stakeholders and why that's actually so important?
Oh, 100% agreed with that point,
Mm-hmm.
right? What I'll say is leadership and kind of executive alignment, right, is critical. Because if you're not aligned on priorities, right, of what the company's doing, what's the business outcome of why you're doing this across, larger enterprise have multiple different layers of business units, right, or different product lines, et cetera, on the front. You've got to understand what's the priorities associated across them as you're looking at the transformations, right? And get them aligned to you, because otherwise what ends up happening, and I've seen this too, is you've got competing projects, right, across the different business units, right? And theirs is the most important, right? And if you don't have alignment at, I'll just say at the top level, so look, we have to see this as one, not as individual singularity, so to speak, right? Then you've got competing projects instead of one coordinated effort, because it doesn't matter if you're there's the R&D side in some cases, right? You're building a product, we'll use that, but there's impact then to the financials, right? So your financial business unit needs to be tied in, and then there could be impact into like human resources on the skills and other aspects. So there's a tie-in that the framework that goes across all different levels, and that's what you've got. That's where you got to have alignment at the top level. Hey, we're all doing this because this is going to help us all in the long run. Versus any particular silo. So that's an important part of it. The thing I will also add, if I could, is it's not just the leadership, it's the your team, right? Is very important. Because the adoption, right? They need to understand. Your people need to understand why it's being done, right, and what the value it's going to bring into their particular. Everybody has different roles in a company, but they have to see it. Why is this going to help me?
Agreed.
Right, on that front. So all those things come into play as you're looking at it, and that's when I went back earlier, I was saying the people, process, technology. That's exactly kind of the layers across all of it you bring together.
I love that perspective. So what do you think is going to happen with AI transformation specifically? As you know, there are certain employees, even now, who might be a little bit older, that might not be interested in involving their workflows with AI potentially.
Yeah,
that could be a case. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but what is your prediction for AI transformations given that particular situation?
Well, I think, as you said, and we've all seen, AI is having a big impact to organizations, right? I mean, you brought up as we were talking even prior to this, about companies and changing their top leaders, right? Because they may have been more business centric versus AI centric or technology centric, right? And I think every company's at a different stage, right, of where they are, right, and what direction. That's where it goes back to, what's the company kind of trying to do? Are they trying to shift because they were a company built on, I don't want to say legacy, but on not transforming into kind of the next generation, right? We used to talk about it for cloud and software as a service, right, versus perpetual licensing and other aspects, right, on site. And now we have AI in there that has taken it to another level. Let's be clear about that, right? So I think it all depends on where you are from a company perspective, right? Obviously, the larger ones have invested a lot and have teams associated. That's all they're focused on. So the real thing around that is it will have an impact. But I also see, like, how then the idea is about adapt, right? That's really key part, right? I tell my teams, and like, I've been around a while, a little longer than you in that aspects, and seen a lot of things. And there's been a lot of technology that always has come its way every decade.
Right.
This is exponentially faster, but all these things like, oh, this is going to change how you do this. This is going to change how you're going to do that, right? It does, right? But you adapt to it. And I always used to say, guys, change is the only constant. We're in this business, right? And you've got to be able to adapt.
It's also talking about even the most technical roles. I'll give you an
Yeah,
example. I interviewed a principal engineer from Amazon, which from my understanding is a highly technical role.
very
And
much.
even that individual is utilizing certain AI coding tools. Now it's not going to replace the entire workflow, of course not,
Yeah,
but it will be involved in the process because that individual is adapting to it. So
exactly.
if even a technical role can be impacted, imagine the other ones which ones are not as complicated workflows. So I think that's a really important point that you made there. And you're going to say something. My
Yeah, I
apologies.
was just going to add to that. I mean, you hit it on the nose there, right? It goes back to the adapt, right? I mean, you got the highly technical engineer, as you brought up there, right? But now
Mhm.
we'll use AI for testing as an example, right? Or coding on that front. I was working with a customer recently where when you walked in there and you looked at how they were doing some of their testing end to end, a lot
Uh-huh.
of they had some automation in there, but a lot of manual pieces and other aspect of it that were prone to error and other aspects. And we introduced an AI solution into there, right, that allowed it to go end to end, basically. And obviously you had to re-engineer the process, but it saved them almost 40% of time, right? That
Wow.
productivity.
Wow.
Now you take that to the next level from a business outcome. What does that do? Time to market, right? How quickly
Exactly.
now I've now got my product out to the market 40% faster than I used to, right? So now you tie the business side with finance, revenue, and other
Way
pieces
more
of it.
competitive.
You got it, right? It makes you way more competitive into today's world, right?
Far
And
more potent. Yeah, far more potent with your solution. Absolutely.
100%. So again, you adapt where it makes sense, right? And but it's you still need to have that knowledge, right? So the engineer still needs to know,
Agreed.
you know, it's not perfect yet, right? I will say that we all know that, right? And
Of
and
course.
it's getting there fast, but it's still the efficiency gains you see out of here and where it can
Mhm.
help you, be it from a technical as well as from a non-technical role
Mhm.
perspective, is
Mhm.
enormous.
And you're not going to be able to create maximum impact if you don't have that domain of expertise beforehand. If you don't know what's actually drive that tangible change from your current understanding, then you
Yeah.
can't really create the maximum impact with these AI tools in the first place. So that's why it's important to know it's not going to replace right now, but rather you can adapt to it because it's not
Yeah.
able to do the workflows itself as of yet. And even for
Yeah.
highly technical roles like that. Now, the last question I have for you before we get to Shailnex Group, which is going to be very
Oh yeah.
important, is really your opinion on that, on the transformation of leadership today. I think we were talking about before in the podcast that before this podcast that we saw Coca-Cola, the current CEO, step down because the board has an idea of going towards more AI driven route. So I want to know
Yeah.
from your perspective. I think what we're seeing here is going to be a combination of technical and I would say business leadership perspectives.
Yeah.
So I want to know from your perspective, where do you think leadership is going today, and why do you think it's going that way?
Well, I think leadership has one of the things about leadership, it always has to adapt to change, right?
Mhm.
And I think, and that's even the leaders have to adapt to change as it's coming, right? So and one of the things I've learned is there's not a single style that works across all situations. Okay, so now you're introducing something like AI into the mix, and some areas, the I'll just say the CEO or the C level in some particular role needs to be more, technical in some aspect. Not being there to coding and other things, right? That's not what they're there to lead the company, but they need to
Mhm.
understand, just like we were talking about the engineer. Okay, what can it do for me and why? Right? You've got to correlate it back to a business outcome, right? But you got to have a context, right? If you don't have an understanding of what it is and what it can do and other pieces of it, right, that's where you're going to tend to struggle, right? And
Mhm.
the context around the financial health, the culture, the
Mhm.
market pressure, right? That needs to dictate your approach, and I think that's kind of what you're seeing in some of the changes that some of the companies are doing, the leadership styles that they're looking for, right?
Mhm.
And I think just like we're talking about technology transformation, leadership is transforming as well, right? What are the right type of leaders that we're going to need, right? And how can
Certainly.
they help us grow, right? And it's all about reading the environment and applying the right level of structure and urgency and empowerment, right? And that's really the key.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about Shailnex Group and what was the founding story behind it?
Well, Shailnex it's kind of what we've been talking about here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about how do we help companies, right? And our focus, our key market dynamic, so to speak, is around the small medium business and PE firms, right? Because
Mhm.
what we see there, what we've seen there, and many of us on within our team have been in senior leadership roles for decades. So and kind of that's our motto, right? Hey, we've seen it, we've been there, we've done
Mhm.
that, and we can help, right? And that's what, and especially in kind of the mid market arenas and others, right? They don't they don't experience a lot of things outside, right, from a larger corporation. So our goal really comes in here is not just about coming in help them build a strategy, right, and
Okay.
seeing where we have gaps, right, but we call ourselves as operators, and we also come in to help them execute it, right? Because bringing that
Got it.
experience to the table, right, really adds the value of it, right? It's not doing it for the sake. Okay, here's what's worked, here's what's not worked, here's how you incorporate the technology, and our company goes across all areas, right? From
Mhm.
the CIO, the CTO, kind of fractional C-suites to CFO, CISO security, which is enabled into everything from
Mhm.
processes, right? Workshops, Lean Six Sigma. So, we go across the gambit, and the real idea about this is how can we help you transform, mature, right, with a clear ROI,
Right.
and help you prepare for that, be it like an M&A, an integration, or looking how do I improve operational efficiencies, right? Looking at my current, you might be more mature, but my processes still don't align, right? And you can see that
Mhm.
you bring in experts like with Lean Six Sigma in our workshops, right, to work with companies to help to kind of look at that and then help educate and train the teams.
Excellent.
This is how you can do it. So, that's the impact we're looking at it, right? How do we turn it from
Love it.
a cost center, right, which everybody looks at, oh, transform, into no, this is measurable into a value.
Right. Exactly. And is this across all industries, or you focus on some particular ones?
No, actually, we are the experience, with our team. We cross just about every industry. We've got experience across all of them, right? And that's
Excellent.
the one thing I'll say is, especially in the digital world here, right? There's a lot of things that are common across the industries. Yeah, there's specific knowledge, and of course, and how things operate and some of the back end. But if you're talking about technology, or you're talking about
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
it's transformative across and transferable, excuse me, across the
Mhm.
different industries.
Correct.
So you
Correct.
know you still got to have a GL for finance. You still got to understand the operational risk, security wise, all those things, right? So all those things come together.
It's the same kind of value providing with this technology. And a quick question for you is: are you focused on digital specifically, or do you also have some AI involvement as well?
Oh, definitely AI. I
Yeah.
I kind of use the word digital in quote unquote.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It did digital in that is AI enabled is what I'll
Right.
say.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
It's inherent. If you don't, let me put it this way, you're legacy big time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the idea is, how do I do that AI kind of digital
Love it.
transformation, right? Just
Yeah.
like the example you were given, where do I incorporate it? What makes sense
Exactly.
for me in my business to incorporate it, and where will I get the biggest value for the buck, so to speak?
Right. And I think it's very important to make a distinguish between essentially applying AI for the sake of it and then doing it for an actual outcome you're looking for specifically. And I think that
Exactly.
is lacking. You're seeing a lot of that as a problem that you're seeing across multiple companies, especially a bit smaller ones as well. So I think that's going to be very, very important to see happen. And I think the value of providing here is going to be one that is actually necessary as opposed to something that's actually a nice to have. It definitely sounds like a necessary one. Now,
it is a necessity. You know, to your point, I was going to say, right? I mean, everything is driven towards that, right? And if you just got to know how to enable it and why, right? I go back to that simple question I've used for the last 40 years. What's the problem am I trying to solve? Or why do I do this? What's it going to do for me, right? It's simple.
Agreed. So I'll ask you one quick question about yourself. I'll do a quick fitness segment, and we'll go ahead and conclude the podcast from there. So the only question I wanted to ask you today is, what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
I'm sorry? What was that?
What is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
Oh, well, I will say, you know, you got to have a balance. That's the one thing I will just share from experience, right? Life-work balance. I know it's important and brought up these days, but actually handling that in the right way is very important for your own sake as well, right? We've all done our right from you know, when you're studying, you know, the nightly all-nighters to even when you're coding, right? I mean, I remember the days coding straight, right? All-nighters, all that. It's fun. You had a blast, and you had a team of, you know, we're all on teams and you know, talking, and we're coding at 3 a.m. with our coffee and other drinks, right? But you know, those are all experiences that helps you grow, right? In that aspect, and we look back fondly on it, right? And I think, but doing things outside of that, I think, is an important part, right? So, like for me personally, I'm a big hockey fanatic, right? Ice hockey fanatic, and you know, so my Carolina Hurricanes are in the going to get to the Stanley Cup final, so that's good. But you know, the whole aspect of that was, I grew up in Canada, so originally, and playing ice hockey, right? It was just my outlet.
Well,
on that front, and you need an outlet, is what I'll say.
I agree on that, but you won't see me doing ice hockey because the last time I did any kind of ice skating, I broke my ankle. So I think that's something I'm staying away from for sure. But that sounds like a good outlet for you. So what I'll do now is share a very concise perspective on how the fitness, and we'll go ahead and conclude the podcast with your plans for this year. So the main perspective I want to provide, just to be as concise as possible, is really about making an approach as time efficient as possible, so you can actually be able to adhere to the process itself. As you know, Mickey, a lot of my viewers are entrepreneurs and executives. So I want to make this as relevant as possible. So the biggest problem that you can see here is focusing on an approach that you cannot adhere to. One I would particularly specifically point out is something that might be location dependent, one that requires you to go to a specific location and utilize that as your main strategy, like a gym or like a studio. The issue with this perspective is that if there are days you're taking calls all day, and if there's days where you're traveling and you can't actually adhere to that process you have in place, then it's going to stack up over time where you're missing quite a bit, and then you're not going to get that goal eventually. So the idea is, how can you make an approach that adapts to your schedule as opposed to you making time for it? Because this kind of approach is one where you have to shift your schedule on for. So what I would recommend is leveraging something that's location independent as opposed to location dependent, something like step count, because while you're listening to this podcast, you can leverage step count. You can do this while you're potentially traveling. You can also do this as well while you're taking a phone call. So leveraging an approach that is adapted to your schedule is going to be far better for you to be able to actually adhere to the strategy itself. And that's the idea behind it. Can you create a strategy that actually adapts to your schedule and one that you can actually adhere to on a long-term basis? And that's the idea. And it's actually what I personally use to lose 70 pounds and actually keep it off. So hopefully it gives a different perspective, and one that is actually doable as opposed to potentially one that is a bit more difficult to adhere to. So what we'll do now is go ahead and conclude the fitness conversation and move on to Mickey's plans for this year.
Yeah, no, I will say what you just described there. If you think about it, it's exactly kind of what we were talking about through this, because you're talking about, in this case, transformation, body and health, right? And congrats on losing 70 pounds.
Thank you.
From there, but it's what you said and what we talked about. You got to adapt, right? And whatever you bring to the table, you have to make sure the adoption's there, right? Just like
Right.
you're saying, okay, if I'm doing this, I may not have a gym everywhere, right? So you're adapting and you're going the steps, right? As you were saying. So all that is what you've got to make sure continues, right? Otherwise, again, everything will stall.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And then you won't even get to the end goal in the first place.
You got it. If you won't get to the outcome you wanted, and that's fundamentally very similar, example when you think about it outside of the business world.
Of course, of course. So where can people learn more about you, Micky? Is LinkedIn the best place?
Yeah, actually, we are a full end-to-end shop. So, more to learn and how we can help is if you go to www.shailnex.com.
Okay.
That our website kind of really outlines, all the areas of the services we provide our key executive leaders who are part of our team and what they can help bring to the table, right? We're on LinkedIn, of course, and you definitely can reach out to us that way as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me, Micky. It was a pleasure to have you on. This was